good day, everybody. Welcome back to Rocky Mountain Readings, where we've been rapidly running through A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious by Rabbi Pinhas Taylor. And we're going to wind it up today. We're going to finish off the book, Hashem willing. He's got a couple interesting chapters that he closes it out, things that I have studied deeply over the last 30 years. But I also want to apologize that yesterday, in error, I had actually broadcast the broadcast to my own personal YouTube page rather than the Noahide World Center. I just got so much on the go on my computer, folks. So hopefully you understand sometimes this is an error. I thought somebody had changed the stream key, but I was actually logged into the wrong YouTube page. And these things can happen. I'm only human, just so you see and understand. Hey, you know, we're all about growth. Been trying to make sure I put on some entertainment for you folks, but also pass on some wonderful Torah, which also reminds me, if you folks have been enjoying this class, as I mentioned yesterday, this Monday, August 30th, okay, we're going to be joined by Rabbi Taylor himself, and I asked people to write down questions. So if you have any questions that you want to get in about the mysterious, that you actually want to ask Rabbi Pinhas Taylor about, we're going to be live with him here on Monday in Rocky Mountain Readings, and we're looking forward to it, but we want to have lots of questions. So I put that out there yesterday. If anybody had any questions, to send me a text or something that they want to be a part of that, and I will make sure that you get a copy of the Zoom room link to join us. We'll probably start at about 15 minutes into the broadcast and go live with Rabbi Taylor. We want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask their legitimate questions, and he has time to answer. But we want to make it a success, because the more successful we make this in the rabbi's eyes, the more that's going to get out there as a place where maybe we can get more rabbis to come on board. And this will be Rabbi Pinhas Taylor's first visit with us here in the Noahide World Center on a broadcast. So it's exciting. Look forward to that. We hope that you'll all want to be a part of that. Shalom, Zakia, and Sheila Etzel is my mother. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If the McConaughey's are out there, and I'm sure they are, and they're following along, we're going to be starting to read today on page 355, where he talks about Pangea and Atlantis. And if you missed yesterday's, it's up on my own Chacham Dan YouTube site, but I will post it up here on the Noahide World Center, so they're kept up there in order. But yesterday we discussed extrasensory phenomenon, and it was on the back of auras in the astral self. It really flowed along well with that. And we also discussed yesterday the location of the Garden of Eden, which I think left me a little dry. But, you know, Rabbi gave his sources and cited his case like usual. He's done a great job at breaking down the topics in this book and done some wonderful study. But Pangea, if anybody's ever seen my movie, Fingerprints of the Flood, okay, you can find it out there. It is on YouTube on my personal YouTube site, Fingerprints of the Flood. You'll see how much I've studied Pangea and the origins, and I know exactly where the rabbis are coming from. I'd like to hear what he's got to say on it. So if you're following along, Mike and Angela in the UK, we're on page 355. Pangea is just one of the names of the supercontinents that are said to have existed in changed form over the course of the early history of the Earth. The term Pangea comes from a combination of the ancient Greek terms for all and land. Pangaea. Instead of the current distribution of the Earth's 7 continents, they were joined together in a single landmass. Okay, this landmass was mostly in the southern hemisphere and surrounded by one super ocean. If you see in my film, you'll see clearly the way the ancient Great Deep was configured. But let's go on with what the rabbi has to say. The idea that of the continents originally being one landmass and later splitting into 7 was first proposed several hundred years ago. And he cites that from a Flemish cartographer, Abraham Ortelis, is believed to be the first person to imagine the continents joined. But if you follow the history of it, you'll see that map making wasn't what it wasn't what it is in modern times. It wasn't like that hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Shalom, Dewey. Always good to have you with us. But it became more fully developed in the early 20th century through German meteorologist Alfred Wegener, which I mention in my film. Aside from the way that the continents seem to fit so perfectly together, but they don't across the east-west on the Atlantic. That's a pareidolia, which is like what people see in an ink blot or in a cloud. They think they see formations, but if you check my film out, you'll see that they just don't fit directly east-west separation across the Atlantic. But let's see what the rabbi has to say. Aside from the way the continents they only seem to fit perfectly together, and the discovery of the mid-Atlantic ridge, which didn't happen until 1961, but that was them overlooking the 1958 discovery by Dr. James Van Allen. Shalom, Mike. Glad to have you with us. We're still on page 355 if you're following along. We're towards the bottom of the writing. Aside from the way that the continents seem to fit so perfectly together, the discovery of the mid-Atlantic ridge, which was in 61, it was confirmed. But in 58, Dr. James Van Allen, whom the Van Allen radiation belts are named after, discovered something called the South Atlantic anomaly. And geologists ran forward with this presupposed mid-Atlantic ridge separating being the driver for the complete movement without giving the geologic origin for the South Atlantic anomaly. And that's where my film fills in the gaps and shows the actual configuration. Okay, similar rock formations, plant life fossils, and even living creatures are found on the opposite side of the continents. But if you see my model, it actually shows it more continuous and streamlined and consistent. The continuity of mountain ranges is another piece of evidence for a once supercontinent, for sure. Round world. Firstly, it should be known that Torah tradition was well aware that the earth was round. This fact is seen clearly in a number of different places. The Zohar perhaps spells out the most clearly exactly what the sages knew about the earth's shape. The whole world is a revolving globe. This is what the Zohar says. Some of the earth's inhabitants are above and some below the equator. The people in different places have different appearances from each other due to different environments of their native lands. And this allows that while it is light for some, it is dark for others, for these day and for those night. And then there is a place where it is light all the time except for a brief period. There is inhabited latitude where daylight sometimes prevails for almost the entire 24-hour period. Yeah, we see that up here in the north when that's due to the tilt and the sphere and the tilt of the earth. All right. But the Zohar and the sages knew that the earth was round, and somehow in the 1400s they got the notion that the earth was flat. The continents. Does Jewish literature mention the idea of one continent breaking up into many, or the idea of landmasses changing and rearranging? When the Torah describes the act of creation, it writes, "And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. This verse seems to refer to the creation of a solitary continent, which became visible only after the lowering of the water level that covered the earth's surface. In other words, at the beginning of creation, only a single vast ocean surrounded the only continent on earth. The Zohar records some significant geologic changes that took place on Earth after the initial creation process. One single continent came out of the water, and from it 7 continents were formed. In no uncertain terms, the Zohar teaches that at the time of creation there was only one continent. Yes. Which at a later stage broke up to form the 7 separate continents. This allowed the water to flow into the gaps between them and form the various oceans and seas. Torah tradition and the current scientific understanding agree that there was initially one landmass that later became 7. The only difference is in the timing of these events. Torah tradition says that it happened rapidly within the past few thousand years, while the scientific community says that it happened slowly over millions of years. The center of the time discrepancy. Taking a look at geologic formation gives clues to the timing of these events. How long ago did these structures form? Why does the scientific model tend to point to a very old Earth whose geological features were formed slowly over eons of time, whereas Torah literature suggests a much more recent timing on these incidents? Classical discussions in the field of geology may provide insight on the age of the Earth and formation of these geologic phenomena. There has been extensive discourse as to how the world came to look the way it does. The discrepancy in perspective is whether the current geological features on Earth are the result of uniformitarianism, slow, uniform, incremental changes, or whether they were caused by periods of sudden, catastrophic transformation. It is likely that the Earth has undergone drastic and swift changes various times in the past. Meteor strikes are one catalyst that could have triggered rapid changes in temperature and atmosphere and caused upheavals in the landmass. For certain, for sure, I mentioned couple in my research, mainly the Vredefort crater in South Africa shows its original in the original signature in the magnetic anomaly map. It shows where it was originally positioned when that actually, in fact, hit. Plus, the big one is the Chicxulub impact crater in Mexico. And I'll mention more of that ahead here. Meteor strikes are, well, okay, anyways. 358, Mike. The changes would have been so large that, despite the accuracy of the scientific tools of measure, the conclusions wind up being meaningless because they are based on assumptions of slow, gradual change. The current working paradigm seems to be the uniformitarian outlook. However, it is important to consider how this worldview developed and if there are challenges to it, for sure. Catastrophism versus uniformitarianism. They have academia has absolute adversity to catastrophism. It breaks up their position for sure. The study of geology became more popular in Europe towards the end of the 1600s and quickly picked up steam through the 18th and 19th centuries. Interestingly, early geologists like Nicholas Steno, John Ray, and John Woodward were also clergymen. They saw no conflict between the Bible and geology and attributed rock formations and geologic phenomena to the worldwide flood in the days of Noah. Steno wrote in his Forerunner that the world is approximately 6,000 years old and that fossils and are remnants of the flood. Woodward and others echoed the idea as well. Later, Reverend William Buckland, the first professor of geology at Oxford University, wrote that rock formations were reliquiae diluvianae, Latin for relics of the flood, which attested to the action of a universal deluge. These early geologists who accepted the premise of a universal flood became classified as catastrophists. Simply put, catastrophism stipulated that the history of the earth has been interrupted or greatly influenced by natural catastrophes occurring on a very extensive scale. And if you see my film Fingerprints of the Flood, it'll show you exactly how the flood happened. Although not all catastrophists were biblical literalists, they were seen as belonging to the same group. Even before Buckland's works, the original theory came under fire. Perhaps the strongest critic was James Hutton, an 18th century Scottish geologist who rejected the idea of a universal flood. In his research, he proposed that Earth was much older than originally thought. He eventually became the dominant dominant scientific approach, and Hutton is recognized as the father of modern geology. The hardest point, though, for the time, I can't stand that short Earth proponents will not admit to the atomic decay rate in the minerals in the actual tangible rock itself. A further blow to the catastrophists came when Charles Lyell, a lawyer and former student of Reverend Buckland, published his influential 3-volume work entitled Principles in Geology. In it, he resurrected Hutton's presupposition and insisted that the history of the Earth is best interpreted in terms of what is known about the present. In other words, the geological processes of change has been uniform throughout history. What it is today is how it has always been. For example, rivers at present erode valleys very slowly, so valleys or canyons seen today must have been eroded slowly and gradually over millions of years. Except there's no sedimentary deposits at the end of the rivers, right? Not to make up for their millions of years definitively. And one of the first maps I looked at when I was doing my research for the separation of the continents was the sediment deposits. You would expect to see such vast sediment deposits that contain sediment of eroded rock for these millions of years, but there's no end. It doesn't exist. So sedimentary deposits, at least he's on that track. Sediments nowadays are deposited in lakes and seas very slowly, and likewise, older sedimentary rock visible today must have been built up slowly over eons of time. This approach was eventually termed uniformitarianism. There's no evidence for it. There's actually contrary. Lyell was a contemporary and friend of Charles Darwin, and not surprisingly played a major role in Darwin's conclusions. Lyell's work convinced Darwin, who was more of a geologist than a biologist at the time. Darwin later linked Lyell's gradual geologic processes with gradual biological processes. Darwin wrote, "I always feel as if my books came half out of Lyell's brains." The tremendous influence that Lyell's writings had on Charles Darwin is summed up by Janet Brown, professor of the history of science at Harvard University. Without Lyell, there would have been no Darwin. And by the end of the 19th century, in conjunction with and because of the popularity of Darwinism, the uniformitarian school of thought became the standard in geology. This is automatically meant that the Earth was estimated to be at least hundreds of millions of years old. Lyell and Darwin brought the old Earth and evolutionary framework into vogue. Once accepted in very short period of time, along with geologist Joseph Pardee, they concluded after many years that Lake Missoula in Montana was the source of this great flood. Estimated place and flow of water at 10 times the flow of all the rivers on the planets combined. Needless to say, 1,000 feet of water moving at about 60 miles per hour can drastically and instantaneously transform the geology of a given area. Retz's view was originally and predictably discarded because it argued for a catastrophic explanation of geology, which was once again counter to the prevailing view of uniformitarianism. One thing I also found is that uniformitarianism doesn't account for what is known as the thermohaline currents. Thermohaline currents are the ocean cycle, the currents that move around the whole planet in a complete cycle where water, warms, drops, cools, and then travels back. But these currents are following a specific flowing direction, and that direction is in fact how the continents separated, not the east-west across the Atlantic from the mid-Atlantic ridge. That is false, and the magnetic anomalies and all the latest geology data that goes to the core of the planet proves otherwise. Okay. Much later, satellite images confirmed his conclusions. He was awarded prestigious Penrose Medal for his discovery, and the telegram attached by the prize committee closed with the vivid and ironic words of, "We are all catastrophists now." Reevaluating uniformitarian thinking. Geological transformations are very much affected by the prevailing atmospheric conditions. Rabbi Eliezer Dressler compares this idea to cooking. Several conditions may alter the time it would take to cook a piece of meat. If the pot is uncovered, it takes so much time. If covered, it takes less time. And if sealed in a pressure cooker, then merely a fraction of the original time. Likewise, depending on atmospheric conditions at a given time in history, the rate of change in Earth's topography would have been different as well. What today, when measuring, may appear like it took many years could be because current atmospheric conditions produce one result: slow change, whereas in the days gone by under different prevailing conditions, things could have changed at a much more rapid rate. Yeah, it's a question of the evidence. In truth, there is much evidence that different atmospheric conditions and cataclysmic upheavals have caused significant sudden transformations in a region or even globally. Beginning in the 19th century, a huge number of mammoths were discovered entombed in Siberian permafrost. Yeah, they literally are folded over. The amount is estimated in the millions. Flesh of frozen mammoths was later eaten with no harm coming to the animals that ate it, suggesting that whatever killed them also quick froze them, flash froze them as well. It also suggests that they never thawed until the day of their discovery, for it had defrosted their had they defrosted, their meat would have rotted. Do we presume radioactive decay rates have remained constant through global history? Johnny Riggs is asking. What about pressure, atmosphere, and other variables? Well, that's the thing, John. Is radioactive goes deeper below the influences of pressure and atmosphere. So, the decay rate has to do with the atomic spin and influences that are not under the same conditions, and you can't get away from that. So you gotta keep intellectual virtue and hold on to it to ascertain what is truly true. And remember, for those that don't think they're judging, the word truth, the word verdict is, some people would call a judgment, but in reality, it comes from verdictum, a Latin word for to say the truth. And so the notion, I find, there is no intellectual virtue in young earth creationism. And Johnny, I'll be clear, and I've said this to many rabbis, I says, to even try and imagine such, okay, is to use unequal weights and measures, okay, which the Torah prohibits for the Jewish people. They're not to own unequal weights and measures, especially for commerce. But when you're dealing with the commerce of ideas, right, you cannot search for a different rate or measurement class. And, I've had a lot of people throw Dr. Gerald Schroeder in my face from his book Genesis and the Big Bang. And the reality is Dr. Schroeder talks about time dilation, which, does actually happen at a constant rate. But to have, 7 literal days of creation, you would have to adjust multiple factors and not just use multiple rates. So that's something to keep in mind. Equal weights and measures are given from Hashem because there's true virtue in equal weights and measures. There's a fairness. And when somebody's looking for that difference in constancy, you're actually, in fact, trying to find an altered weight or measure. But if it's consistent, Uh, the pursuit isn't the crime as much as the statement of saying there was in fact different rates of time or effects. He uses the cooking analogy very well there. That if you cover the pot, it's going to cook faster. If you put it in a pressure cooker, yeah, it's going to cook faster. But that doesn't justify saying, okay, there were unequal weights and measures. Hashem wouldn't use unequal weights and measures and then tell the Jewish people to not use unequal weights and measures. But back to these mammoths, they've been very challenging to explain according to the uniformitarian worldview, but not my model of the flood. If you look at my model of the flood, the way it rolled over the North Pole, and the way the spin of the Earth and the Coriolis effect during an isostatic pop would cause the fold over. Yeah, this is how these mammoths were trapped and flash frozen. Charles Darwin, who, as mentioned above, rejected the idea of catastrophic changes in the past, confessed in a letter to Sir Henry Howarth that the perfectly preserved mammoths in the north were to him an inexplicable conundrum. Additionally, why would these masses of mammoths, millions of them, I mean, you can still find mammoth tusks in Alaska and Siberian Peninsula. Additionally, why would these masses of mammoths and other animals migrate to Siberia in the first place? They live there. What could they possibly eat? Why are there no signs of ice age glaciers in Siberia? Well, because of the way, if you look at my movie, Fingerprints of the Flood, you'll see the way the Siberian Peninsula actually opened up. There's 3 geologic folds in the Siberian Peninsula at the north that the magnetic signatures show the folding stages and the way it closes up over the North Pole. Okay, currently one of the oldest places on Earth. Well, there's spots in Siberia that are show the oldest places based on density of the if you look at the crustal density of the Earth. Shalom, Ashley G. The crustal density, there is some of the oldest places in Siberia, but what happens is the thinner crust moves around the denser crust, and it's just the way physics works when you're bending material. I come from a steel town, and if you've ever bent or worked with steel and understand the way things bend and fold and can bend and fold, yeah. Such extreme changes in atmosphere must have also changed atmospheric pressure. If so, how can the duration of geologic changes be measured by current atmospheric conditions? Well, my model shows that it was the flushing of the continents that actually kick-started the thermohaline currents, which actually altered climate for sure. And we do have the testimony in Torah that the rainbow happened after the flood, and the conditions would have been definitely more misty before then, more humid around the entire globe. Furthermore, consider the fact that there is a deserted but well-preserved city located 2.5 miles above sea level in the Andes Mountains. It is far above where anything grows, and the air is hard to breathe, suggesting that the mountains rose in the historical era. Look at my model, folks. It shows all that. After the city had already been built. Interestingly, Helmut de Terra of the Carnegie Institute and Thomas T. Patterson of Harvard concluded that the Himalayas reached their current height during the historical period, i.e., in the past few thousand years. And, the way they crush together. It's just the way the density of the Earth's crustal thickness. And like I say, the thinner stuff bent around the thicker stuff. And, the biggest thing with plate tectonics, the worst is how much they rely on subduction. There is nowhere near the subduction needed for their revolving models. It just doesn't exist, right? The amount of subduction that is on the Earth. And thankfully, all this stuff is measured now, and more than that, since submarines were created, and they've got all the bathymetry pings of the seafloor around the entire planet. These models that we have nowadays, they made such illogical leaps because they didn't have enough data back 150 years ago. Catastrophic changes in Torah literature. All of the aforementioned cataclysms, from continental drift, meteor impacts, and other rapid catastrophic upheavals and climate shifts, have notable parallels in the writings of the sages concerning the flood and similar cataclysms in early biblical history. The Jewish sages discuss large changes that took place in the days of Enosh, a grandson of Adam, because many in that generation had strayed after idolatry and other sins. Volcanism tells a lot, folks. I live in a volcanic glacial valley right now, and the area I'm in was actually covered more than a mile high of ice at one point, and we see all the slow erosion processes on the formation, and out my window here is a dormant volcano. Knowing when that ended, there's a consistency around the globe, plus desertization. There's so much data that one can learn about desertization and the motions of the planet that actually caused the desertization around a similar period as well. The Jewish sages discuss large changes that took place in the days of Enosh, because many in that generation strayed after idolatry and other sins. Among the changes, they mentioned that the ocean rose and engulfed 1/3 of the earth. In addition, the sages write that at the creation of the world, that's from Rashi, Bereshit 6:4. Interesting. In addition, the sages write that at the creation of the world, mountains were not created and the land was level. Well, it was more level for sure, but I find that from the moon data, from the Grail missions, we can surmise the stamping process, that when Hashem said, "Let there be light," boom, in the stamping process, there was instantly light, but there was a stamping, and that's what caused the formation of the initial landmass. Long story, but I got lots of detail if anybody wants to know. As the generations continued, further storms and geological upheaval occurred, climaxing with the flood of Noah. And through these, the mountains and hills were formed, not completely, but the complete overturn of the natural order in the times of the flood is elaborated upon by the sages. The sun and moon function differently. That's from Avos de Rabbi Noson, Sanhedrin 108, Yalkut Ruvenai Noach. And I find that the tilt had just kind of adjusted. In an isostatic pop, it went from being wider at the equator before the flood to what it is today, and it's still kind of receding at the equator, which is causing a taller stance in the Earth, and that's where you get more direct sunlight, which is where you get the real global warming question come into play. As the generations continued, further storms and geological, the complete overturn of the natural order. The Midrash says that before the flood, there was constant springtime. People only needed to cultivate their fields once in 40 years, and they had much longer lifespans. I don't know. I don't trust I don't read the long lifespans in the Torah like some people imagine. I don't see that as the actual case when you read it based upon the grammar of the day when it was written, and that the earth was one landmass that could be traveled across uninterrupted by ocean. Yes, definitively. The Talmud says that Hashem took 2 stars from Kima and brought a flood upon the world. It has been suggested that perhaps These were the two asteroid impacts that triggered the global upheaval that split the continents and so forth. Very speculation. Furthermore, the sages say that it was during this time that the Earth acquired its 23.5 degree tilt, creating sudden climate changes and initiating seasons. Well, like I said, the flushing of the continents created the thermohaline currents. And when you look at what the thermohaline currents, they pull all the clouds, they pull all the rain, and they bring hot and cold cycles throughout the whole planet. And I think if we didn't have the water on that we had, the Earth would have shattered apart during its separation that way. This perspective answers many of the mysteries concerning the development of the planet. The issue is not with the scientists or the tests that they are performing, which may be completely accurate. Rather, the concern is primarily focused on the assumption of uniform conditions. Yes, so the academia has such problem with anything catastrophic. Yet, with all of this to ponder, scientists are still often unwilling to treat seriously the possibility of historical catastrophes because without eons of time, evolution falls apart. I don't want to agree with that, but the option is not on the table for discussion. Rabbi Avigdor Miller writes, when a world catastrophe is postulated to explain the phenomenon used as proof of the Earth's age, they reject it by claiming that the history of nature is uniform, and what is now has always been on the basis of uniformity. They exclude any possibility of a great upheaval caused by the flood, which explains many of the Earth's riddles. Yet, when needed to serve their own ends, they do not disdain the theories of countless recurrent global upheavals, such as the extraordinary heat followed by suddenly extraordinary cold, which is essential for the Ice Age theory, and which their theory requires that it happened many times. Yeah, so much to look at. Theories of continental changes. What does the Torah say about the theory of plate tectonics? The Pirkei, the Rabbi Eliezer, an early midrashic work, spells it out clearly. The earth is made up of plates covering the depths of a ship that floats on the sea. Similarly, the earth is made of plates above the waters, as the psalmist 136:6 declares. Give thanks to the one who makes the earth as plates on the water. It should be noted that in biblical Hebrew, the word mayim, or waters, is a broad term that refers to liquids. For sure, and we see that in the beginning of Genesis, and the earth was without form, and darkness was on the face of the deep. That word deep is mayim, it's not necessarily waters. Until fairly recently, this midrash would have been quite puzzling until it became accepted that the plates of the earth float over the molten rock interior of the earth. Yes, well, now we have scans of what is below, and I've tried to look at all as much as I can, all the way down to the 2,800 kilometer mark till you reach the core. And the magnetic anomaly signatures tell the tale. It's just like how a doctor can tell that a bone has been broken through an X-ray. They see the striations and the healing process in the X-ray signature. Well, the magnetic anomaly map of the world works the same way, and I spent 6 years doing the measurements following that, and until it all came harmonious together. And then data, since I put that together and copy wrote that map, and I tried to involve academics and did have many academic discussions. I did an excerpt last year on the 27th of Hesvan, November 15th, 2020. We did a 2.5-hour session where I added some detail to that as well. And I invite anybody to check that, or if you have any questions, feel free to ask. All right, but Dr. Hadassah Melamed suggests that the geologic changes mentioned above happened very rapidly during the flood in the time of Noah. The reason for the discrepancy You still need the trigger, folks. You need to understand the trigger, and my model shows that it's the slowdown of the Earth's spin, which no scientists disagree with. The slowdown of the spin is what caused the pressure buildup, which eventually reached a stage of popping like an overwound watch. The reason for the discrepancy in time span is because geologists do not take into account the events resulting from a sudden catastrophe that affected the planet as a whole. Of course not. They just have an absolute aversion to it. There are a number of Torah sources that suggest that it was during this time that the continents split and the greatest changes occurred. Upon the earth, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch writes that it was during the flood that the continents rapidly took on their current appearance. For sure. There are other sources that suggest that the major changes in continental drift actually occurred rapidly after the flood, during the generation of the Tower of Babel. There was a subsiding and some events after the flood, like the biggest thing between the time of the flood and the Tower of Babel, especially in that area, is watching the receding shoreline, and then they put a settlement, and then it would recede more, and they would put a new city, and you can follow the receding. But understanding the geologic changes, the descendants of Shem were actually sent to go east and were turned around because they couldn't get through what is currently the Khyber Pass. The geology didn't allow for them to migrate, and so they moved back down into the valley where the land of Samaria there, in the early Babel area where the tower was built. But my evidence seemed to show that Japheth's family was sent north and west, and Ham's family was sent south. Nonetheless, let's keep going. The purpose of building the tower was to try to outsmart God, as it were, or go to war with him. God responded not only by changing their languages, but also by dispersing them to the farthest reaches of the earth. The Torah recalls this when mentioning the name of Peleg, who was called this because in his days earth was divided, or niflega. It seems that Jewish literature supports the idea of the land masses of the earth having been joined earlier in history, and through the catastrophic changes of the generation of Enosh, the flood of Noah, and the generation of the dispersion with the Tower of Babel, the land masses eventually took on the form they have today. Now, that's a general good way to put it. Now, he's going to go into Atlantis. While on the topic of catastrophic changes in the Earth's land masses, it is perhaps worthwhile to make mention of Atlantis, the legendary island nation. Everything we know about Atlantis comes from its mention in the Greek philosopher Plato's works, Timaeus and Critias. Atlantis has been viewed with fascination and mystique since that time. A brief history of Atlantis. Plato describes Atlantis as a powerful and advanced kingdom that became corrupted, and concludes the story with Atlantis falling out of favor with the gods and being submerged into the ocean. Plato writes vaguely that the location of Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is traditionally the Strait of Gibraltar. The timing of its downfall is said to have occurred 9,000 years prior to Plato. Actually, 9,300 years prior to Plato, beginning with the ancient Greeks. People have been divided as to whether Plato's story was to be taken as history or mere metaphor. It seems that most historians and scientists throughout history have concluded that Plato's account of the lost kingdom of Atlantis was fictional. They say that Plato invented Atlantis as his vision of an ideal civilization and intended the story of its demise to be a cautionary tale of the gods punishing human hubris. I like the work. There's the work of a British aerial cartographer. What's his name? It'll come to me. Anyways, he postulated Atlantis in the Andes, and he cites his reason why. And I find his material um, quite intriguing and fascinating. Okay. Although Atlantis plays a very minor role in Plato's work, the allegory aspect of Atlantis has great literary impact, influencing utopian works of several Renaissance writers such as Francis Bacon's New Atlantis and Sir Thomas More's Utopia. The remain There remain elements of fascination with lost continents and lost civilizations, especially as popularized by 19th century science fiction and speculative fiction by authors such as Jules Verne, Edward Bulwer Lytton, and H. Rider Haggard. Others speak of Atlantis as fictional, but speculate whether there have been actual historical events and locations that inspired Plato's story. At the same time, others have suggested that Atlantis was an actual place and speculated on the possible locations of where this land once was. Interestingly, Sir Isaac Newton's posthumously published work, The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended, which details the rise and history of various ancient kingdoms, directly mentions Atlantis. Furthermore, as exploration grew in the Americas, some people began to believe that the Mayan and Aztec ruins were somehow a remnant of the people and technology of Atlantis. The real reawakening and modern widespread popularity of Atlantis is mostly due to Ignatius Donnelly, a U.S. congressman and amateur historian. Donnelly claimed in his 1882 best-selling book, The Antediluvian World, that all great advances in civilization and technology could be traced back to Atlantis. Donnelly also added his own ideas that have become part of the Atlantis legend. Donnelly believed that Atlantis was the location of the biblical Garden of Eden and that it met its demise in the flood of Noah. Ultimately, Donnelly is the source of contemporary interest in Atlantis. I don't know. I've been to the Bahamas. They've got Paradise Island, Atlantis there, a hotel. Supposed locations. There are dozens of theories of the supposed locations of Atlantis or the place that inspired the tale. Most of the proposed historical locations are in or around the Mediterranean Sea, such as Sardinia, Santorini, Crete, or Cyprus. Popular culture places Atlantis somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, as their names are closely related. The guy I was thinking about, British aerial cartographer James Allen. Anyways, he develops the word Atlantis comes from two Mayan words, Atl and Antis, which has to do with the land of water and copper. Atl being water, Antis being copper, and his work is quite intriguing. James Allen, retired British aerial cartographer from the military. The guy just phenomenal train of thinking, and he went through a film out there called Atlantis in the Andes. His material is quite yeah. Anyways, let's keep going. Some of the more intriguing ideas include the North Pole and Antarctica. Anyways, a Jewish look at Atlantis. Philo Judaeus of Alexandria was a Hellenistic Jewish philosopher who used philosophical allegory to harmonize Jewish scripture with Greek philosophy. His views are not widely accepted with mainstream rabbinic Judaism, but Philo wrote about the destruction of Atlantis as follows. And the island of Atlantis, which was greater than Africa and Asia, as Plato says in the Timaeus, in one day and night was overwhelmed beneath the sea in consequence of an extraordinary earthquake and inundation, and suddenly disappeared, becoming sea, not indeed navigable, but full of gulfs and eddies. There seems to be events from Jewish tradition that parallel the description of Atlantis' demise. As mentioned above, there were several catastrophic events in the Torah that drastically changed the Earth's topography. This began with the generation of Enosh, where 1/3 of the land on Earth was flooded, the flood of Noah, and the generation of the Tower of Babel. All of these resulted from the corrupt and sinful behavior of those generations, is what he's stating. The starting point of parallel would be the flood of the generation of Enosh. The Jewish sages write that the Mediterranean Sea was formed in stages during the above cataclysms. Interestingly, in the 1970s, researchers discovered that at one point in history, the Mediterranean Sea was actually a 2-mile deep depression of dry land. Eventually, the ocean broke through the Straits of Gibraltar into two separate stages. The Mediterranean Sea was formed. I think that has been disproved, that position for sure, and that had to do with certain salt or mineral. I can't remember the name of it, but I remember somebody throwing that at me and having to research, and it had to do with certain salt crustacean that are pushed up on the outside, and they said that could only have formed in dry conditions, and in fact it turned out to not be the case. The sages centuries ago had already spoken about this two-stage formation. They said that the prophet Amos twice declared that God calls the water of the sea and spills them over the earth. This is not a redundancy, they explain. Instead, it points to the fact that the ocean broke out twice, and in these two surges, the Mediterranean Sea came into being. The first time was in the generation of Enosh, and the second time was during the generation of the Tower of Babel. The only disagreement between the Jewish sages and the researchers is in the timing, with the sages saying that it happened much more recently and quickly than mainstream researchers. Yeah, I find young Earth creationists. There's hard to discuss the truth with, as it is dealing with adamant Christians. You can't get through to them until they take off their Christological glasses, and if you can't get, young Earth creationists, I find don't even have that degree of strength to stand on. There's just no evidence for instant literal young Earth creationism. There's no evidence for it. The only disagreement between the Jewish, with the sages saying that it happened much more recently and quickly than mainstream researchers. During these periods, God violently and subtly manipulated the plates so as to flood that area, causing the complete topographical change and subsuming lands that were once exposed. Rabbi David Brown, a contemporary scholar, writes that Plato's story about the sinking of Atlantis is undoubtedly a remembrance of the loss of one of these subsumed ancient lands. Rabbi Yosef Shanai, a contemporary Sephardic scholar, makes reference to Atlantis directly, linking it to the generation of Enosh. He writes that Atlantis was part of the third of the world that was submerged in that generation. Interesting. Another contemporary Jewish scholar gives a slightly different hypothesis as to where the rumors of the Atlantis disappearance came from. When the New World was discovered by Columbus, which it was discovered long before that, some historians began identifying the Americas with Atlantis. The Spanish historian Auguste de Zarat also notably wrote that when Plato described this downfall of Atlantis happening 9,000 years before his time, it was in fact 9,000 months, not nearly as far back as originally stipulated. Interestingly, Rabbi Yehoshua Inbal, a contemporary scholar and Rosh Kollel at Darchai Torah in Modi'in, writes about the generation of the Tower of Babel, the generation of Peleg, as being the time when the continents were separated. He writes that there is some speculation that the lost continent of Atlantis was actually a reference to the continent of America, which was in fact known to those early generations. Rabbi Inbal suggests that the continent appeared lost to the people of Europe, right, after the original supercontinent was separated into 7 during that generation. If you see my model in Fingerprints of the Flood, and you look at Plato's honest description, he describes an impossible shoal they could not get through, and you would have had that directly right out of the Straits of Gibraltar. You'd got out so far on a ship and you couldn't go any further. He describes the seething of the ocean in that area and the tectonic area where they initially measured the seafloor spread. That area would have been hot and molten and muddy is the way Plato had described it. You couldn't get through, so people didn't sail through there. So it was forgotten. But where Plato appears to get his material from, he cites it getting it from an Egyptian Egyptian priest, Solon, that was recorded. Now this stuff would have been lost in the Library of Alexandria, burned. In essence, there are two clear parallels between the Torah view and secular view on how the land masses were formed. There are parallels, for sure there are, shaped and separated. Even the legendary lost continents may in fact be based on incidences recorded in Jewish literature. Perhaps as discoveries continue to be made, the fascinating parallels in knowledge already contained in Torah tradition will become more evident. And I'm all for that, but you can't flush intellectual virtue to claim your position. All right, so we're moving on to the very final chapter, and there's only a couple pages here, folks. He talks about the Bermuda Triangle, which, if you see my study with the magnetic anomalies, the Bermuda Triangle isn't a dilemma anymore. I mean, I show clearly in my film 3 distinct impressions right at the base of the Bermuda Triangle, 4,200 meters below the ocean surface at the base. When you look at the magnetic anomaly signature, it actually has the stamp of the Chicxulub impact crater in the magnetic signature, and my movie actually shows that. But there's also, it shows a 2-stage process that the same signature at only about 1,800 meters below the surface, below the Dominican Republic, just above South America, there is also a 3rd signature that appears to be the middle and shows 2 stages of separation for the what caused the Bermuda Triangle. It literally peeled away as North America bent from the north over the crest. You got to understand 3D motion on a sphere. The Bermuda Triangle, or Devil's Triangle, is a famous area in the shape of a triangle that covers about 500,000 square miles of ocean off the southeastern tip of Florida. Now, Rabbi Taylor is from that region of Florida that it tips off of. It is said to be a mysterious section off the Atlantic Ocean, roughly bounded by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, where dozens of ships and airplanes are believed to have disappeared. Not believed, there are many that are recorded as disappeared. The legends and mystery. There are some early accounts that helped build mystique in this area. In October 1492, when Christopher Columbus sailed through the area on his first voyage to the New World, he reported that a great flame of fire, probably a meteor, crashed into the sea one night, and that a strange light appeared in the distance a few weeks later. He also wrote about unusual compass readings. Magnetic anomaly. Additionally, there is strong evidence that Shakespeare used elements of an actual shipwreck in his play, The Tempest. The Sea Venture, a 17th century English sailing ship, was on its way to Jamestown, Virginia in 1609, when a huge storm, probably a hurricane, blew it off course into the uninhabited island of Bermuda. This may have further enhanced the mystery of the area. At the same time, reports of unexplained disappearances did not really become widely known until the 20th century, once newspapers got out there. One enduring mystery occurred in March 1918 when the USS Cyclops, a 542-foot-long Navy cargo ship with 309 men on board, sank somewhere between Barbados and Chesapeake Bay. The Cyclops never sent out an SOS distress call, despite being equipped to do so, and an extensive search found no wreckage. The Secretary of the Navy at that time, Josephus Daniels, wrote in his annual report, "There has been no more baffling mystery in the annals of the Navy than the disappearance last March of the USS Cyclops." President Woodrow Wilson similarly commented that only God and the sea know what happened to that great ship. Ironically, years later in 1941, two of the Cyclops' sister ships likewise vanished without a trace along nearly the same route. Some claimed that a pattern began forming in which vessels traversing the Bermuda Triangle would either disappear or be found abandoned. In July of 1945, Thomas Arthur Garner, along with 11 other crew members, was lost at sea in a U.S. Navy patrol seaplane in the Bermuda Triangle. They left the Naval Air Station, Banana River, Florida, for a radar training flight to the Bahamas. They were never heard from again. An extensive 10-day surface and air search found nothing. Then in December 1945, Navy bombers carrying 14 men took off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida airfield in order to conduct practice bombing runs in a mission known as Flight 19. It seems that the compasses began malfunctioning and the leader of the mission got very lost. All 5 planes flew aimlessly until they ran low on fuel and were forced to ditch in the sea. That same day, a rescue plane and its 13 crewmen also disappeared after a massive search failed to turn up any evidence. The official Navy report declared that it was as if they had flown to Mars. It was in a 1964 cover story about the mystery of Flight 19 that author Vincent Gaddis coined the phrase Bermuda Triangle. In Argosy ship with ropes and push them through because the ropes are the same size as the holes. Rashi's remarks are also not entirely clear. The Rashash, Rabbi Shmuel Strashun of Vilna, a later Talmudist, comments on Rashi's words and in so doing resolves the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. His explanation is the following. Rashi clearly indicates that what he was aware of, a magnetic attraction, is what causes the disappearance and sinking of ships that pass over certain parts of the ocean. Parenthetically, it is worth noting some of the interesting research by modern scholar Dr. Hadassah Melamed in her book, The Secret of the Flood, the Bermuda Triangle, and the Migration of the Continents. She writes about a Talmudic passage that describes the flood in the days of Noah. Because they perverted their ways, the Holy One, blessed be He, changed the works of creation and made the constellation of the Pleiades rise at daybreak and took 2 stars from the Pleiades and brought a flood upon the world. The word star is used generically in Torah literature to describe any number of celestial objects. Mike says I've turned over 2 pages. So you're saying, Mike, I missed page 376 and 377? You're right. Thanks, Mike. Let me back that up. In Argosy magazine, Gaddis popularized many stories about anomalous or paranormal activity that had taken place there. Charles Berlitz also wrote a book called The Bermuda Triangle, which sold 20 million copies, was translated into 30 languages, and helped popularize and boost the mystery to far reaches. There are indeed quite a number of similar incidences of disappearance that have occurred over the 10 years. And with Rabbi Taylor being down in that region of Florida, it's well known for those that go out on boats. Theories and counter theories. For those who thrive on following the paranormal, the Bermuda Triangle is a hotspot. The disappearance of ships and planes have been attributed to a wide variety of machinations, such as giant sea creatures, alien abductions, Atlantis time warps, and reverse gravity fields. The more scientifically minded seem to lean more towards theories like magnetic anomalies. Water spouts are large eruptions of methane gas from the ocean floor. There are, in addition, other interesting and obscure theories. One of the more interesting scientific theories for the disappearance of ships in the Bermuda Triangle was theorized by American geochemist Dr. Richard McIver. In places where the water is particularly deep, methane hydrates that bubble up from the sea sediments on the ocean floor might cause ships to disappear. Landslides on the ocean floor can release large amounts of the gas with disastrous implications, significantly reducing the density of the water. This could make a ship floating above sink, and a highly combustible gas could also ignite aircraft engines, causing them to explode. Some do not consider the area to be mysterious at all. John Riley of the U.S. Naval Historical Foundation quipped, "The region is highly traveled. To say quite a few ships and airplanes have gone down there is like saying there are an awful lot of car accidents on the New Jersey Turnpike." At the same time, the Bermuda Triangle region has some unusual features. It's one of only two places on Earth where true north and magnetic north line up, which could make compass readings unpredictable. The triangle also has some of the deepest water trenches in the world, where wreckage could settle in a watery grave, miles below the surface of the ocean. Once again, none of this is the discovery of a scientific rule, just strange activity spoken about by people. Keep that in mind. To our tradition, although there is not a direct reference to the Bermuda Triangle, as the name was only coined in 64, like he said, the concept might be alluded to in rabbinic tradition. A modern scholar, Rabbi Yosef Bagad, suggests that the Talmud and early sages made mention of it. In a Talmudic discussion, an example of harsh death is brought up. It is described as ropes that are forced through tight holes. Rashi explains that this obscure terminology is actually describing. He writes that is like pulling a rope through the loopholes of a ship. There are places in the ocean that do not tolerate iron. Sailors tie the planks of a ship with ropes and push them through because the ropes are the same size as the holes. Rashi remarks are also not entirely clear. The Rashash, Rabbi Shmuel Strashun of Vilna, a later Talmudist, comments on Rashi's words and in doing so resolves the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle. His explanation is the following. Rashi Occam's razor, definitely. Rashi clearly indicates that what he was aware of, a magnetic attraction, is what causes the disappearance and sinking of ships that pass over certain parts of the ocean. Forgive me, my throat. Parenthetically, it is worth noting some of the interesting research by modern scholar Dr. Hadassah Melamed in her book, The Secret of the Flood, the Bermuda Triangle, and the Migration of Continents. She writes about a Talmudic passage that describes the flood in the days of Noah. Because they perverted their ways, the Holy One, blessed be He, changed the works of creation and made the constellation of the Pleiades rise at daybreak and took 2 stars from the Pleiades and brought a flood upon the world. The word star is used generically in Torah literature to describe any number of celestial objects. Dr. Melamed opines that these 2 stars, in fact, impacted areas near the equator. The first star superficially hit the west of the primordial supercontinent Pangaea and caused it to fracture into huge plates, splitting it from the Earth's crust to a depth of 5 kilometers. Within 24 hours, these plates drifted to the positions where they remain as the continents that we know today. This magnetic star, mostly made of iron and nickel, lies in the Bermuda Triangle, and it seems is responsible for the magnetic distortions and mysterious phenomena that have occurred there. This essay, while inconclusive, is interesting in that informative from Jewish tradition may parallel the mysterious activity of the Bermuda Triangle. And then we reach the appendix, folks, which is as far as I'm concerned, the end of the book, and that has been A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious by Rabbi Pinhas Taylor. Some difficult topics in there that I don't think everybody will easily accept. You're dealing with the mysterious, and I hope you guys have really enjoyed that. But more so, I hope that you folks have some real legitimate questions and are willing to join me on Monday, the 30th, in a Zoom meeting with Rabbi Taylor. I'll send the Zoom link out to the usual suspects, but I'm hoping that some other people might have some questions. Johnny Riggs, is it something that you might be willing to attend? Have you got any questions you may want to ask Rabbi Taylor in a Zoom meeting? I just want to make this as interesting as possible so that the rabbi feels welcome. You know, I've told him that several people have bought or ordered books, and, it's a joy to try to reach and connect with these rabbis and to have them share the wisdom of Torah with the nations. It's a joy when they're willing to, and when they write a book, it's always good to give them the honor for such a large work. I think what you've got here in this book is something that, definitively could be considered a resource material if you wanted to know. There's some things I have more difficulty with than others, but some of the things he's brought out here for me are just, profound to hear the notions. And what I value most of all is that at the bottom of every page, he gives all his references. So it's there for you to, to probe deeper if you want to know the case of the matter. And I think in some cases he's made a conclusive case. Towards the end, there may be a little less conclusive, but then I've spent 30 years working with the geologic things. So, well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, John. Ashley G, Zakia, always good. There's been several of you have been coming daily and regularly. Nina, it's nice to have you with us. And, of course, Mike and Angela in the UK. It's a joy that we can spend time together and go over some great stuff. Dewey, you as well, yes. Now, I want to maybe break into a new book. Maybe next week we could, if you guys are interested. What do you think But Monday, I want to have a good time getting together with Rabbi Taylor, and I'm really hoping if I put this on and nobody shows up, it's going to be a disaster, and I'm going to look like somebody who doesn't know what he's doing or really can't get anybody to participate. And I need your support, folks. So please. I don't want to post it publicly because we've had too many trolls of late at the Noahide World Center showing up out of nowhere. And, sadly, I don't want trolls jumping into a Q&A session with a rabbi. I want the rabbi to feel comfortable to share and I don't want any trolls. So I don't want to put the Zoom meeting into a public feed. So if any of you have questions and you want to partake Monday, okay, let me know, and I'll make sure that you get, before Monday's class, I'll make sure you get the actual Zoom link, and we'll probably break into it at about the 15-minute or half-hour mark like we had during the book of Job. And we're going to be joined by Rabbi Taylor himself. And so it's exciting. And we'll go from there. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Zakia. Yeah, it was a big read. I mean, like I said, when we started, this is a fairly hefty book. Definitely a solid, thick book. But we were able to chunk through it like almost 40 pages a day and just zoom. Little by little, you get things done. It's exciting. All right, Johnny Riggs says he'll make an effort to be here. Bezrat Hashem, appreciate it, John. I know you're a well-versed gentleman who is kind of heart, and would be nice to meet you in person on the Zoom room if you'd like to come. And Mike and Angela in the UK, I hope that you folks will come on the Zoom room. I'll see if I can get my friend Hans from Paraguay to join us, and it'd be nice if I've already had a lady named Karen asked me to be involved yesterday. She followed along, and hopefully we get a few others. So if you have any questions, ready for the next book, Zakia, you're just, you can slurp it up. Okay, so, and then Tuesday I'll probably break into this book called Between God and Man by Rabbi Abraham J. Heschel. If you want to research who the man was, he was a professor in New York at a prestigious university who taught Jewish studies. Definitely Ivy League quality, Ivy League character. And this book, Between God and Man, really pulls out the heart of what Agadah is and shows you the difference between halakha and Agadah, where halakha is, that courtroom ruling, and Agadah is that drive of connection between man and God. And what when he calls the book Between God and Man, he's actually talking about the way Hashem has ordered it, and I find it just beautiful and helpful in one's walk to actually become a more flourishing and abundant walk of life. But so I'm going to sign out for today, folks. I do have a broadcast. We have got Pirkei Avos this Saturday. You're welcome to come. And, of course, this Sunday, for those of you that go to Rabbi Goldberg's Genesis class, he'll be doing a special speech on Rosh Hashanah, about Rosh Hashanah this Sunday. You're all welcome to come to that as well. Hopefully I'll see you there. And Monday we'll be back with Rocky Mountain Readings, and we're going to have a visit from Rabbi Pinhas Taylor. And I hope to get several of you on this Zoom meeting as well, so that we can have a good time asking legitimate questions from Rabbi Taylor. I'll try and get some time free and pen some notes myself so I can ask him some stuff. But I think getting good questions, the rabbis love these Q&A sessions because it gives them opportunity to shine, and it respectfully asks them for honest answers to difficult matters. And he's done a wonderful job spelling this out here. And I think the biggest thing in my mind is, what topics did he research that didn't make the cut for the book? There might be many others. I mean, you don't do that kind of work and that immensity of study without, axing a couple of topics, or maybe. So I'd like to see what he's got to say on that. So, well, on that note, I'm going to sign out for today, folks. That's been Dan here from Rocky Mountain Readings, and we just finished A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious. And please be back with me on Monday when we're actually Q&A about the book, A Jewish Guide to the Mysterious. Shabbat Shalom. After Shabbat sunset, Saturday, sharing intricate. Till next week, folks, have a wonderful, wonderful day.